Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to Shop Talk. Today's a special edition featuring viewer mail questions, actually viewer comment questions to be more accurate, brought to me by my co-host, Glen. How you doing, Glen?
I'm doing great, Dave.
All right, so these questions are going to be brought to me by Glen, who's gone through the comment section, and I may have seen them because I obviously spent some time in the comment section answering questions as well, but these are ones that I have not yet answered. So let's see, before we get there, what have we got for news? Actually, I have no news, but there was something came up in the comments section about the last episode, the password security one, and that was that if you cross the border and enter the U.S., they can demand to see your phone, which I always knew. But apparently they can require that you unlock the phone and give them access to everything in the phone, which is kind of spooky to me. Now, if you're not a citizen, I can see that any country can require pretty much whatever they want, or your option is not to go to that country. But for citizens, I was like, they can't do that, can they? And so I looked it up, and the best information I could find was that they can't deny you entry, but they can, significantly complicate your life and delay your entry while they're waiting for you to do it. So I don't know what to advise you what happens. I'd be hear what people think in the comment section, especially if you've had any experience with this, what happens and what your options really are as an American entering the U.S.
So they can't force you, but should you not comply with their request, they can make your re-entry really uncomfortable and difficult and delay some time. Is that
That's my understanding.
Understanding?
Yeah. And I'm not sure what purpose that serves. If they can't enforce it, why they would hassle you, but maybe I guess they know their business. So I saw a study where they did an assessment of whether police at various levels or different types of police could actually detect people lying any better than regular people. And the regular rate of detection was like 50% for people. And it was 50% for regular police. And it was something like 51 or 52% for detectives. But the highest number was border security guards were up around 60% because I guess they're pretty good at detecting when they're being lied to.
Yeah. Is that, is there something different in what do they do in their training? Or is that just a skill that gets developed because they have a lot more opportunity to sort of ask questions? I mean, they're getting pretty good repetition on that.
Yeah, my best guess would be that they do it so much all day, every day.
It's a developed skill.
One bit of PDP-11 news.
I'll be a little more cautious when I cross the border. No.
One bit of PDP-11 news is I had everything finished. I had the machine installed. I had the CPU. I had 2 RAM boards in it. I had a disk controller, an Ethernet controller, floppy controller. Pretty much the machine maxed out, and I got everything working, and I got it booting 211 BSD and RT11. And thanks to Mark Matlock, I got a nice setup with RSX11M running on it. And then I got my son to help me lower the machine to where it's finally going to go, and then it wouldn't boot anymore. Memory error.
Of course.
So I pulled it all apart and went through, cleaned all the edge connectors on the cards because they're old and stuff with, what's that stuff, Deoxy, the magic solution. Cleaned all the edge connectors, put them back in, same error. So I actually have 4 of these RAM boards, and what I found out is that I went through and one by one just installed one at a time. And 2 of them are having issues just by themselves, so I set them aside for later repair. But then the 2 that were working, I put them both in, and it would fail. And I would try reversing them, and it would still fail. But each one independently would succeed. So I'm guessing at this point, maybe there's an issue with that slot that I'll have to try putting the boards in somewhere else and see what happens. But it was really weird that I could run any one board, but not any 2 boards.
Yeah, I never even thought about the slot. I was just assuming maybe there's something funny with the boards, or if there's something on the board where it will only work as a single and doesn't work in a pair. Or yeah, the slot could be the other part of the issue on that as well. You got any idea how to troubleshoot that?
Well, I think what I'm going to do is try to put the memory boards in a much further down slot and see if I can get them working anywhere in the system. The problem is there are continuity lines that run through the bus, so you can't leave empty slots between cards in that kind of system. So you have to put in continuity cards to bridge the grant lines from slot to slot if you don't have cards in it. So it's a little complicated, but it's not rocket science. But I'm kind of frustrated with the machine, so I'm just leaving it down there until I get some time to look at it again.
Yeah, just slow roll it. And I think from what I've heard and I've seen, I think there's been some people that have done stories on it. The Atari solution of blowing into the slots probably won't work either.
No, it's probably better than nothing, but yeah, that's pretty famous. I never had one of those actually, so not something I did. Was that the Atari or was it the first Nintendo? Oh, they both had cartridge slots. So.
I mean, I had a 2600 and I'm positive we were blowing into the cartridges.
Okay.
I'm sure we were. Dust removal, it was very precise and well developed and understood at that time.
Right. There was an advanced science in the 1980s. What else? Oh, when I first got this damn PDP-11 working, I was all excited. I started to install operating systems on it, and the power switch started to feel a little weird to me. And like it wasn't rocking cleanly, and I had to press it kind of hard to get it to turn on and kind of hard to turn off. And I went to turn on, and I pressed fairly hard. And when I let go, the button popped right out of the machine all these springs fell out. There was a bright flash and all the lights went out. And so what had happened was the internals of this switch failed, fell apart inside, and shorted out the AC line voltage, which is actually routed through the mechanical switch. Like on a modern PC power supply, they just have, I don't know what it is, a 5-volt trigger or something that goes to a trigger line that lets you turn on the power supply. But in this case, they're routing the entire AC line load through the front power switch on the machine.
Until you release the springs.
So then my next step was, well, now I'll just hotwire it. So I took it apart and I used a 10 amp fuse with spade terminals, the ones that are like that. And I plugged it into the 2 leads.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't get anything to work. So I took my meter and I started measuring things and I couldn't find any power. And I didn't know at the time how this switch worked. So I'm like, I'm not getting any line voltage here. Well, long story short, I had to take the whole thing apart, and inside the power supply, there was the 10 amp fuse had blown, which I find weird because on the back of the power supply, there's a 7 amp breaker, but it wasn't tripped. So why? I don't know. Maybe it's a slow acting breaker or something. But
yeah.
So anyway, I replaced the fuse.
Yeah, nothing like a 10 amp fuse for a 7 amp breaker.
So I replaced the fuse and then I powered up and I got it all working again after I hotwired it. So, but today, fortunately, somebody wrote to me online on Facebook and said that they have a power switch for it. So I may be hooked up and that will be nice. The machine will be complete again because it looks kind of bush league right now with no power switch.
Until the next time it gets moved from the floor to the counter back to the floor?
Yeah, it is a rather fragile beast, it seems.
Apparently, yeah. Wow. And it's not light either.
No, I had back surgery, so I'm a little careful about what I lift, but I generally get somebody to help me lift it off and on. The first time I put it up by myself, and that's why I don't do that anymore. I don't know what it is, 80 pounds. It feels like it's 100 if it's 80, but it's probably up there somewhere. Well, what do you got for viewer questions? You want to do the first one?
Well, yeah, you know what? I got a couple sort of quick hitters, I think, from one of our earlier episodes that I managed to pull off. So I'll just ding you with a couple of those, and then we'll go on to the big, the bigger, longer one. So first couple, we got a couple folks here, ENR Lennox and Magoo 401 are both asking some questions about your monitor. So what monitors are you using? Samsung? Which model? Can someone please share? Samsung, not the Dell? What's going on with the monitor, Dave?
It is the Dell. And I think in one episode, I referred to it as a Samsung monitor. And I corrected that in the comments. But, if people saw it, then enough people watched that video and heard me say Samsung when I meant Dell. And, of course, I did a whole episode on the Dell monitor. So it's had lots of coverage. But, yeah, it's a great monitor. It is, 42 inches, I think? Man, you think I would know, but I'm pretty sure it's 42. And it is 5K. So I can run it at full resolution on the Mac, and it's 120 hertz, which is nice. So both the Mac and Windows through the NVIDIA card can drive it at 120 hertz.
And it is glorious. I've seen it. Even for a colorblind guy, that thing's fantastic. The next one, what KVM are you using? Do you have any issues with it?
I use the KVM built into the Dell, and I do have a couple of issues with it, especially relative to the Dell that I had before, which was a 38, I believe. 3 inputs into it. You could run a DisplayPort input, an HDMI input, and a Thunderbolt input. On this one, you can do Thunderbolt and one other, basically. You don't get the option to run all 3. So I can't plug my MacBook in and charge it, which was a nice feature in the old one. You still can, but that takes that entire dedicated circuit.
And there you go. Nice segue with the reference to your Mac that you can't plug in. Which computer do you prefer or find yourself using more, the Mac or the PC?
Really depends what I'm doing. So if I'm writing Windows code, of course, if I'm writing Windows code, I'm using Windows. If I actually am writing a lot of code, even under Linux, I'll do it on the PC side because I like Visual Studio. I like Visual Studio Code, and I can use it on the Mac side as well. But you get so used to the keyboard, Alt and Control keys that trying to go back and forth between Mac and PC, I find very difficult in a code editor. So unless I remap those keys at some point, I don't really have a lot of choice. So I do most of that on the PC side, but pretty much all the video editing, video production, and writing I do on the Mac because I have a MacBook and then I've got a Mac Pro on the desktop here. So long story short, depends what I'm doing, and I try to use the best tool there is for the job. I do a lot of stuff under Linux, which is on a server off in the closet, but that's more, obviously headless console stuff. So any productivity work generally falls to the Mac. Coding work to the PC and running stuff off on a headless server falls to Linux.
Okay, this is the big one now. We actually had a direct email question, so drum roll. This is pretty spectacular. Stefan, and I'm going to pronounce it Stefan. It's Phan. It might be Stephen, but I'm going Stefan. I was wondering what your opinion is on currently available email services specifically in regards to security and privacy. Again, getting back to some of your recent YouTube videos, what do you think about free offerings like Gmail, Outlook versus paid services? What about secure email like Proton? What about buying your own domain and using your web host email services? A lot of things in there all around the same topic and relevant to what you were just did your.
Yeah, it's a good question. Initially, I actually ran my own mail server for maybe almost 20 years, from like 1990 something through 2015 maybe. And I ran Exchange server on a dedicated box. Well, not a fully dedicated box, unfortunately, but on a box mostly for mail. And run an Exchange server at home is a lot of work. I mean, you can get a certification for Exchange and it takes a lot of study. And those people know a heck of a lot more about Exchange than I did, because I was just, trying to solve problems. I wasn't really trying to optimize things, because there was just one, well, pardon me, my intruder alert's going off. Driveway monitor. Where was I?
To your own server. Yep. And all the certification and stuff required that goes along with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So running an Exchange server is a fairly complicated task, and it's not something I think anybody should take on lightly. And you could probably run MailX or whatever the current mail daemon is on Linux fairly easily, but it's getting it all set up and interconnected to all the other systems. I don't think, unless you have a really compelling reason, that you should probably run your own email. And if email is so important that you have to run it, then reconsider that as well. You might want to source it out to somebody like Google, because they're robust and their uptime has been great. That's what I switched to probably 10 years ago. And at first I was just using Gmail, but then I got to register a domain, and I registered a bunch of domains, one for each person in the house actually. And so everybody in the house has their own email domain and email usernames and space quotas. And we run as a small organization. And so it's a small business, and it's not, I wish I could tell you the exact price. I think it's like $60 a month, and there's 6 of us. So it's not a bad deal.
And that's, I'm assuming all kinds of storage and data capacity that comes with that as well.
Yeah. I don't know what it actually comes with, because I use OneDrive, because I get an alumni discount on that one, and I get like a terabyte of free space. So I stick with OneDrive. But if you're using Google Drive and you sign up, I believe it does expand your quota on what you're allowed to use.
And now I want to pick up on something you said earlier, and I might be just poking the bear again, but is it Mail Daemon or Mail Daemon?
It probably depends on the platform. If it's on Unix, we're going to go with Daemon. If it's on Windows, it's probably a Daemon.
That stuff just claws in my brain, and I can't help myself. So apologies for that.
It's kind of a tangent, if I can interrupt you before the next question, is running the Exchange server at home. I had this server, and I don't remember what it had, 32 megs of RAM or something, because this is, mid-late 90s. And Exchange likes to use all the memory that it can get, which is fair for a server process. But if you ever tried to walk up to the machine and do anything with it, it would churn away for like 3 minutes until it paged enough stuff out that it could get a login session, your desktop, and everything else going. So I wrote a batch file that would every couple minutes or 30 minutes or so would load this huge thing and then free it. And so you would always have a chunk of memory, and then Exchange would always slowly eat away at the free memory. But if you got to it at some point near to after it had done this allocation and free, the machine was way more responsive. And that was actually the origin of MemTurbo many, many years ago. And it's basically that functionality packaged with a nice GUI and a VCR style display and all the other functionality. But the core of it is just trying to keep free memory available to make the machine more interactive. So it makes it feel faster to the user using it. But of course, that's at the penalty of Exchange. It's probably running at half the speed now because it's half crippled from low memory. But there's no free lunch. But if you're hungry enough, I think it's great for the interactive user.
Yeah, I loved hitting the MemTurbo button.
I should be clear, though, that this was a long time ago, and that on today's hardware and with the price of RAM, there's, and it wasn't a RAM doubler or a RAM compressor or any of those other nonsense things that came around in the 90s. It was strictly to just make memory available for interactive use. But yeah, that's a long time ago.
More than 20 years, I think. Just over, at least.
Almost 30, yeah, because it would have been 96.
Siungalunga, PDIF out from your PC through TOS link optical cable. How? Got some PCIe card going or motherboard port? And how to use that rack EQ under your monitor, Dave?
Well, let me tell you about my audio system. What I have is 2 PCs. I've got a PC and I've got a Mac. Now, plugged into the Mac, I've got a Thunderbolt Apollo Twin X what is it called? Universal Audio Apollo Twin X, which is a Thunderbolt device, which makes it basically a PCI card, but it plugs in externally through the Thunderbolt card or through the Thunderbolt port. And it is a sound card in its own right, and it's also a mixing console and studio, and it comes with a whole bunch of powerful software that I honestly never use. I use it pretty much as a big volume knob and for producing XLR outputs that I then run first into a splitter, XLR splitter, so I split it into 4 channels because I have 4 speakers. Oh, first it goes through the equalizer, I should say. It goes right from the Apollo to the equalizer. Equalizer then outputs it to the splitter, which then drives the speakers through the 4 XLR ports. And the nice part of this whole setup is that the PC has a SPDIF optical digital output. And so I simply plumb that into one of the optical digital inputs on the Apollo. And so the Apollo actually mixes both audios. And so you could actually hear the PC audio on the Mac if you needed to, not vice versa. But it all comes out the main speakers, and it's all controlled by a single knob. So you don't have to, I don't need a separate knob for the PC, and now I got to adjust the volume on the Mac. And so it works great. It's a little overkill for somebody that's not doing audio production, I think. And there may be other solutions that can achieve the same usage scenario more cheaply. If you know of one, let me know, because I think it's a great way to set things up. It's just a little pricey.
But it sure looks beautiful sitting on top of that EQ under the monitor.
It does. It does. Shop art.
Oh, Canadian audio guy. What would be the next step up from the Threadripper?
Wow. An IBM Z-Series mainframe? I guess there really isn't much of a step up from the Threadripper except the Epic, but on the benchmarks I've seen, my Threadripper, when overclocked and run with PBO and the power unlocked and stuff to motherboard limits, can pull 800 watts. And the performance numbers are higher than I've seen on the Epic series of chips running at, their locked frequencies. So I don't know that there currently is anything faster than the 96-core Threadripper. For single core, yeah, there's going to be, the gaming-centric CPUs are going to be faster on a single core. But for the multi-core workloads, I think it's probably still king of the heap.
You haven't overclocked your machine and tested it, though.
Yeah, I have. Well, not overclocked. It's so the Dell, the HP machine is locked to the chip's default because it doesn't have the cooling. It's like a 350 watt total TDP, and that's what they designed for. Well, I said, I'm going to water cool it and add a whole bunch of fans and do a bunch of extra work so I can dissipate 800 watts or 1,000 watts. And it turns out about 800 is what I can handle. But it's a fair bit more engineering and cost. So if you're going to go that route, I would probably go to a system builder like Puget Systems, somebody like that, Falcon, Northwest, one of those guys, girls.
At Cohen Lemon, very cool. What's the story on the patents? And how do you even invent something and get a patent?
Well, some patents are better than others. What have I got here? 6 patents, I guess, up on the wall, up above my desk here. 5 of them I got at Microsoft. 1 I got post-Microsoft with my own company for some security software algorithms that we came up with. I used to think that anything that was software was kind of obvious in a sense that how can you patent it? I've got a little more insight now, but the legal team's perspective was if it's new and novel and hasn't been done before and is useful and compelling and is somewhat hard to do, then we should patent it. So we started being incentivized, and it was $500 or $1,000 for every patent application you wrote up, because it's a fair bit of work to write one, that was accepted and processed by legal for a patent application. And then I think you got a small bonus as well if the patent was issued. So there was some incentive there to do it. And it was probably obviously to build up Microsoft's patent portfolio, not to necessarily go after people for violating things that are in their patent set. But if some other company has a patent dispute with them, I imagine you trade, right? You both show up with your big books of patents and you do a comparison.
So those patents were based on code that you developed while employed for Microsoft. So it's your name on the patent, but it's Microsoft that controls the patent?
Yeah, so you give it to them, and they used to give you $1 in Lucite. And the reason is, in the U.S., it used to be you cannot give anybody a patent. You can only trade it for something, a peppercorn or some
consideration.
Yeah, consideration. And so they made it sort of a tradition in the U.S. that when you gave a patent to a company like Bell Labs or something, they would give you a silver dollar. And so Microsoft continued that initially with silver dollar, and then it's got kind of a fake dollar in the cubes that I have for all the applications. You got little cubes for them that were engraved. And so they've got a kind of a fake dollar in there, which I assume is an homage to that.
Cool. Harcaretto, and I cut off the last part in there. Harcaretto DB. So cool. Do your kids appreciate your collection?
I think they're kind of intrigued by it, especially the bigger machines like the PDP-11 with the huge discs and all that, because it's such a departure from what we see today. They don't have any desire to come out here and play adventure on the PDP-11, I don't think, or talk to Eliza on the TRS-80. I mean, they've done those things, but they don't come back for more somehow. So, yeah, I think they appreciate them, but of course, they're not nostalgic about them. So it's kind of like me looking at a card sorting machine from the 1950s. I think it's cool, but it doesn't bring back a lot of memories for me. So I don't have that nostalgia aspect for stuff that's before my time either.
And sort of related to that, but and not part of this is, again, I think you retired from Microsoft in, was it 2003,
2003,
02 or 4?
Yeah.
2003. So, and then you and your wife are running this company. Your kids sort of, by the time they were of a certain age, you were already retired. So they don't really know you as having a job or anything like that. So a lot of this stuff must be a bit mysterious, is it?
It is. At least they see that I'm always busy and doing stuff. So that's a good. And, so is mom, and she volunteers and runs the school's merchandising programs and a bunch of stuff. So they see that we're busy and engaged. But yeah, I don't get up and go off to a job at 8 a.m. every day. And I remember, I think it was Mark Z at Microsoft. I was asking him because he was a very early employee and probably didn't need to work for a living by the time I got there. And so I was asking him, what keeps you coming in? And he said, well, I think in part it's that having my kids see me go to work every day and do a job and be productive and so on and so forth. And so that always kind of stuck with me as well.
Go ahead. You were going to finish another thought there.
No, I was going to say, and then I quit.
I'm glad you got that in there. At Ghost Miner, why do you call it a shop when you don't sell anything in there?
Good question. I think it's a local dialect thing. In the U.S., you park your car in the garage or garage, depending where you live, and you may have a little workshop somewhere, and sometimes they're attached. And so it's not shop as in shopping, it's workshop as in place you fix things and make things and work on lumber and cars and that kind of thing. So it's an abbreviation of workshop as opposed to shopping.
Yeah, I just had this discussion with a friend of mine from the UK, and yeah, they buy things in a, what was it we were having? Yeah, you buy something at a store. We shop in a store, but we can also buy things from a shop. And yeah, the English language in North America has kind of been flipped around a couple of times where some of that stuff doesn't translate well.
Yeah, and of course, Canada has its own whole thing, right?
Shop versus garage and all sorts of things, right? That, yeah, you've had a few discussions on that.
Yeah, I remember my grandpa used to say go uptown as opposed to go downtown. And I always wondered, is that a small town thing? Is that a Saskatchewan thing? Is that a Swedish thing? I don't know where that's from. But
well, my similar experience to that is I was associated as a small town, that the city has a downtown and the non-cities have uptowns.
Okay, that would make sense.
But that's probably based on nothing. Eric Haller, 5503. When is Dave going to give us some Tempest pointers? No need to divulge all your secrets, but give us neophytes a few clues would be great. There's still folks playing that game, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, I could actually give some good information. I got no secrets. It's one of those things that I think you can either understanding how to play the game helps enormously, but it's a weird set of reflexes because there are basically 3 rhythms that repeat in the game. There's the flippers that flip and the pulsars that pulse and destroy lanes, and the fuse balls advance and retract to the top rail at a certain cadence. And so your brain kind of has to predict the intersection of those 3 for when it's safe to move and advance and shoot. It's not something I'm confident everybody can do at the speed it requires and process that. And that's probably what makes me good at it, is that I'm just happen to be good at that particular thing for some reason. But there are a lot of tips I could give, and what I would probably like to do is an episode on how an arcade machine works and, cover the coin counters and the motherboard and the power supplies and everything that's inside there, the monitor, the vector deflection units and all that. I think that would be interesting. I don't know how many people would watch it, but it'd be interesting to me.
I mean, I know just going through and pulling all the questions from some recent episodes, that was one I think that's in my catalog right now. Someone had a question about coin handlers and I think trying to deal with British coins versus Canadian coins and some of those sorts of things. Again, I don't know if you can cover all of that, but there's at least one other person who's interested in the coin collection aspect of it. And geez, I've I've done a lot of workout shoving quarters into machines in my childhood that
Yeah.
I'm damn curious too. So
One of the cooler things that I didn't know is that on old payphones, it's just a standard two-wire connection, right? And you can hear the operator, and she can hear you when you pick up and hit zero. And this is, the 1970s phones or earlier I'm talking about. But how do they keep track when you make a long distance call, how much money you're putting in? There's no back channel. There's no data channel. There's nothing to tell them what you're putting in. What it actually is there's a mechanical coin verifier that makes sure it's a valid coin. And once it falls through that, it lands on a bell. And the different coins make different sounds because they make, different impacts. And the operators would have learned to be able to distinguish and count and sum the different ding-dongs that come from putting in different coins. And in a way, it's such a genius solution to a problem because, I would be like, oh, you need an ESP32 and you need another channel back with, in order to push data, and how I would solve it today. So I love some of these old mechanical solutions.
man, that's awesome. I just there was a piece on the news the other night here locally talking about payphones and other disappearing, and I thought there's hardly any left, but apparently there's still 11,000 of them in
Oh,
Canada,
really?
which seemed like an awful lot more than I thought there would be. But yeah, they're still around.
I wouldn't mind getting one of the last ones that, the fairly nice ones with the VFD display and even the credit card reader, but the really heavy duty ones in good condition. Everybody that wants them now wants the old 1950s ones.
Right.
I don't remember those. I was from the 70s and later, so I would get the newest one, which would be cheap.
So the old school phones, because they're payphones, but the most modern of those payphones, there must be some inventory of those somewhere.
Yeah, because they used to have 20 times as many of them as they have today. So, they could have crushed a bunch of them, but there should be a supply of them around. I guess check eBay would be the easiest way.
I know my aunt and uncle have one in their house, and they've had it for 30, 40 years when they were still pretty active, but it's an older style one. But yeah, that would be a nice little item. Infinite One Deer. Was there more to this collection? I think they're talking about the computer museum, or specifically the stuff that's going to be auctioned off, specifically like the generation or two after the big iron you've highlighted here, the third gen Cray, the DEC Alphas, the SGI, Sun, or IBM heavies.
I think there are a couple things that are not part of the collection that have found homes outside of the auction, but there's not a lot of machines, and there are actually numerous machines that were there that are going to be in the auction and were not on display, but in the warehouse, that were not on display in the LCM because they have been acquired since COVID basically, and they've worked on some. Some are completely untouched, some are fully restored. It's a mix depending what order they brought them in, I guess. So yes, there is other hardware, and some is now not missing, but has gone elsewhere. But more has been added than has been taken away, I would say.
Yeah, and I remember a couple of the photos that I'd seen. They had multiple boxes of components and parts and bits and pieces that some of it was part of the display, but is some of that stuff being auctioned off as well? Or is it really just the sort of full functioning machines and the bigger items?
No, I did not see any accessories for sale. There's a mouse, which they're thinking, I don't know if you've seen mine. It's the green button mouse connected to the IBM PC.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're saying it'll bring like $1,500. Like, wow, I had no idea they were worth that. So, and I think somebody sent me that one because I had one and lost it. Or gave it, I didn't lose it. I had it at Microsoft and didn't bring it with me when I quit.
Moondoggy 19, no TRS-80s in your collection?
Yeah, I've got a TRS-80 Model 1, Level 1 in the brand new original boxes. I bought it from a dentist, and they had used it for some accounting and got frustrated with it and put it back in the boxes and stuck it in a corner. And 30 years later, it wound up on eBay. So I bought it about 10 years ago. And I have got it connected to, I forget who makes it, but it's a little board that allows me to use a SD card as storage and that kind of thing. It's got 2 drives and an expansion bay, but the machine itself is still a Level 1. So,
and again, I can't hear TRS-80 without going back to grade 9 and trash 80.
Yeah,
that garbage talk again. If you gotta put something up by slamming something else. So the trash 80 was
Yeah, I used to ride my bike down to Radio Shack once or twice a week and play with the TRS-80 as much as I could. So I desperately wanted one, but my parents couldn't afford that. And I eventually got a Commodore 64, which is a little more reachable a couple of years later. So speaking of SD cards, though,
Ooh.
I found this one. Let's see.
There
16.
we go. 16.
Yeah, so it's not 16 gigabytes, it's 16 megabytes. And this is the card that I used when I was working on a format dialog to have something to format that didn't take so long, rather than formatting a hard drive all the time. It was faster to format the SD card during testing. But I can't believe it's only 16 megabytes. And that would have been 1996-ish. But yeah, incredibly small.
Ryan O'Daniel, 700. What do you? Oh, this one. I'm not going to touch this one. What do you guys think X is worth now? This guy, you think it's worth 4 times what Elon paid for it? And we had a discussion before about X or Twitter. And it'll be 10 times in a year or two. Really like how the videos and blogs are working. But you got any sort of idea on where you feel sort of X, and you've got a Tesla, and the SpaceX interest and all sorts of stuff. So Elon's not out of your vernacular for sure.
Yeah, I own a lot of Tesla stock, or at least a lot for me, and I've owned it a long time. So I'm biased and have to give that disclosure. In terms of Twitter, it's private now, right? So it's worth whatever somebody would pay for it at this point. I don't know. I would guess their advertising revenue is significantly down, and so that's going to be a fair chunk of their valuation. But I think they've also opened it up to a lot of different, like I didn't use Twitter. I never even looked at the thing until it was X because it just seemed like a circle jerk of people, you know, self-affirming and reaffirming each other's views. And not that I had contrary views to that, but it just wasn't something I needed to be part of. And so now I go in there and I don't have strong views in any direction. I generally spend my time pointing out logic errors and hypocrisy in other people's posts because they drive me crazy. But I'm not taking a lot of, controversial stands, so it doesn't generate a lot of interest. But in terms of valuation, it's really hard to know, I think.
And it's probably not super relevant for Elon either, I think, eh?
No, I think it's kind of a toy for him. Now, it was a lot of money. And as long as he doesn't have to liquidate a bunch of Tesla stock to pay off debt or something, but it didn't help the stock when he had to sell stock in order to buy Twitter. So
he's been down or close to zero at least twice in his lifetime, I think, too. So that's not unfamiliar territory. Should he get there a third or fourth time?
Well, he thrives on risks. So
question for you. Not me, but I'm glad there are people who do. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything they do, but boy, without folks who are pushing that edge, limits don't get expanded. Technochuck's got a question for you. Now that you've retired, and you've retired for some time, do you have any plans to travel? And where would you like to go? A little outside the tech world, but yeah, where does a...
Yeah, since retiring, I've really only been to, other than, family trips and stuff, and cruises and stuff local on the continent. I've been overseas twice, went to London and Paris twice, and where else? That's it. Well, no, that's not. I went and took a Mediterranean cruise for my 30th anniversary this year. So that was cool.
And now you and I've talked a little bit about travel. I'm not a traveler, but again, with your ASD and travel and some of the routine and things that you have in terms of your life around home and in your shop and that sort of stuff, do you want to talk just a little bit how that sort of stuff impacts when you travel and different accommodations that you and I think even your family have make and have made and recognize in terms of some of the impact that travel has? As much as it is nice for a whole bunch of folks, it's a bit challenging for others in a whole bunch of different ways. So
yeah, it's challenging for travel. Is challenging on two big fronts. The first is the change aspect, because I like things the way I like them. I like them where they are. I like them how I put them. I like my system and my spot on the sofa, and I like my TV, and I like all my things. If you remember Rain Man, he had his books arranged on his bookshelf a certain way, and when the Tom Cruise character came in and started moving things around, he kind of lost it a little bit. And so that's an extreme version of that. But being at an airport and being at the mercy of security guards and border agents and travel vagaries and flight delays and weather, it's just sort of a stressful environment for me. And the other thing is you have to deal with a lot of people. And I'm not really good with dealing with people. Well, it's not that I'm not good with dealing with people, but it wears on me and it sort of consumes a certain amount of energy. And then I need a break from having to deal with people for a while. But sometimes when you're traveling, you don't get that option. So those two things would conspire. And it's funny because we used to go to, I think I talked about this in my book, how when the kids were little, we would go to Disneyland and, you start the day early at 7 a.m. with a character breakfast and all that. And then by about noon, I was done. And I was like, I need to get out of here. And I don't really know why, and I don't know where I want to go, but I don't want to be here anymore. I love my kids. I wanted to spend the time with them. So we would find me a bench to go sit on to rest. But it's like, I'm not tired. I just need a break from the crowds and the noise and the overstimulation and the millions of people wandering around. And so eventually we figured out that if we stayed near the park, after lunch, I could boot out of there for an hour and go do email and relax in the room for whatever, and come back and trade off. And as long as I got a break in the middle of the day and maybe another one before the parade at night, then I would be great. But took a long time to learn that. And of course, until I was diagnosed, I didn't know why some of these things were challenging for me.
I got one last one. It's not on the list, hasn't been sent in, but it's more. So I'm clearly I'm not where I was the last 2 times we did this. I'm in our hometown here, Regina, visiting my folks. And it sort of ties in a bit to the email security technology. And we were talking about passwords, and boy, I said, boy, if you got a parent or grandparent or something, boy, get them locked into some sort of password manager. So my question now is sort of related to the not so much the email, but the technology and doing everything online. And I've seen this in some of my work, but my mom now is experiencing this, and your mom maybe as well, where you're trying to do a lot of things like with the bank or the telephone company or your cable company or whoever. And it's, well, just go online. And for folks like my mom, that is just like, that's just way outside of her comfort zone. She's not confident in doing that and wants to do it in person, but to try and even get to do stuff in person is a real chore. I mean, soon, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, that those sort of folks will be around. It'll be all people like my kids and your kids who are quite comfortable in that realm. But you have any thoughts on that sort of awkward moment where we've pushed so much into technology and having a smartphone and having a computer, where in person and even on phone, you're just sitting on hold for an hour and a half for something that you just want to get done?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned your mom. My mom's kind of an odd case in that she doesn't have a cell phone, never has, but she has an iPad, and she, got a book on the iPad and went through it page by page and learned everything there was to know, at least in the iPad for Dummies book and so on. And so she's pretty competent and productive with it, but doesn't have a phone. And she's good with a PC, but doesn't have a lot of tech in her life. So she stays up to date with the things that are productive for her, which is kind of a good way to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
With the push to everything online, it is complicated. I mean, try buy a ticket to a concert. You can't. I don't need to show up at the stadium and buy a ticket anymore. You have to use Ticketmaster, and you get an electronic ticket. And so I think, unfortunately, a lot of that is not going to be optional, and it will be harder for some people to adjust. But, it was hard 100 years ago when people had to go into town to talk to the bureaucrats at City Hall about something, and they could do that face to face, but they were used to life on the farm and didn't want to go talk to strangers. And so I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but I think everybody's probably smart enough to do it. But
in another 20 years, when we're in our 70s and we're even more curmudgeon-y, what are we going to be whining about? Well, back in 2024, where I used to be able to do this on my phone, and now you want me to. When are we going to be?
Yeah, now I got to stand on the holodeck and act it out.
Yeah, we'll find something. Yeah, we'll find something. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I got for questions, Dave. So unless you got some other stuff you want to add.
No, I should remind people to subscribe if you like any of this format, because we're trying to gauge what the reaction is by both comments and engagement and subscriptions, and will tell us whether it's something that you enjoy and want to see more of. So let us know through those 3 mechanisms.
And keep popping questions in the comments, because I'm stripping them out after about 4 or 5 days after each one and putting them in a little list. So,
well, you're not stripping them out. You leave the comments, but you copy them down. Right?
I'm copying them. Yep.
If I don't like them, I strip them out. All right. Well, thanks for joining us out here in the shop today and in our home office in Regina, which rhymes with fun, I'm told, according to the Tourist Bureau. And no, I did not make that up. Until next time, in the meantime and in between time, hope to see you next time, right here in Dave's Garage. This little chair will be waiting for one of you, and a rocking chair for another who likes to rock, and a big armchair for 2 to curl up in. All next time on Dave's Garage.